Good evening, and we are returning to the regular council meeting for Wednesday, December 6, 2023. We did open the public portion earlier, and then we went into closed session. There were a couple of things we had to do beforehand, and as usual, if you are doing in-camera discussion, you can't have any votes in camera. So there are a couple of motions that are coming out of the in-camera discussion. And I will go to Councillor Peterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just because we still had items to discuss, I would move that Council defer the discussion on items 3.3, Regional Opportunities Working Group, 3.4, ICC Discussion Advice from Officials. Regional Groups is under FOIP Section 25, subsection 1. 3.4, ICC Discussion is FOIP Section 24, subsection 1A. And finally, 3.6, Council CAO Dialogue under FOIP Section 24, subsection 1B.
Thank you. Now that we have that motion
and it goes to 13.1. Sorry, Your Worship.
Okay. Now that we have that motion on the floor, is there any discussion on that motion? And seeing and hearing none, I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
That motion is carried. Councillor Peterson?
I have nothing further, Your Worship. Sorry.
Okay, right, sorry. I go to Deputy Mayor Langmaid for the next motion, correct?
Yes, please, Your Worship. Thank you. I'd like to move that Council make the following appointments to the Municipal Library Board. Tammy Anderson to the Municipal Library Board for a term of 3 years ending October 31st, 2026.
Thank you. You've all heard the motion. Is there any discussion on that? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
And that motion is carried. We have no public hearing tonight, and I don't believe we have any public comments. We have no delegations tonight, so that brings us to the consent agenda. Are there any items from the consent agenda that any councillor would like to see removed and put into the regular agenda? Councillor Montgomery first, and then Deputy Mayor Langmaid.
Thank you. Yeah, I would like to have item 9.3 removed from the consent agenda, please.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Mayor Langmaid.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would like to remove item 12.1, Marigold Library System Freedom to Read Week from the consent agenda, please.
Okay, thank you. So is someone prepared to make the motion? Councillor Peterson?
Your Worship, I would move that Council adopt the recommendations of the following agenda reports by an omnibus motion. 8.1, Regular Council Meeting Minutes, November 14, 23. Regular Council Meeting Minutes, November 15, 23. Special Council Meeting Minutes, November 29, 2023. Community Improvement Program Funding Recommendation. 9.5, Town of Strathmore Library Contract for Services, First Amending Agreement. 9.6, December 2023, Committee of the Whole, Change of Start Time. 9.7, January 2024, Committee of the Whole, Change of Date. 9.8, Mid-sized Cities Mayor's Caucus, Thank You Letter. 11.2.1, WADEMSA Meeting Minutes. 11.2.2, Municipal Library Board Meeting Minutes. 11.2.3, Wheatland Housing Meeting Minutes.
Thank you for that motion. Any discussion on that? Then I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
And that motion is carried. So we move now to item 9.3, Corporate Strategic Plan and Financial Plan Quarterly Report, Quarter 3, 2023. Sorry, 9.1. 2024 operating and capital budget. Sorry, Liana.
Thank you, Your Worship and Council. I'm here in front of you again this evening to talk about our 2024 operating and capital budget. I am prepared to do a full budget presentation. I have a small presentation of about 25 slides if you'd like to go through this, or if you would like to just ask questions of anything that we have brought forward to you after our question and answer period. But I would like to kind of, for the public, just to kind of talk a little bit about what has happened throughout this budget deliberation for this year. So one of the things within the Municipal Government Act, under Section 242 of the Municipal Government Act, a council must adopt an operating budget year for each calendar year or may adopt an interim operating budget for part of the calendar year. At a council meeting that was scheduled on November 1st to release the budget documentation to council and the public, administration brought this forward to you. Council then held a community engagement session on the budget on November 7th, and we had an increase in members of the public that came and actually asked questions, and I felt that they were very satisfied in the responses that they received. Then we moved into a meeting on November 14th, which was a question and answer period from council. And we were actually able to get through all of the items that council wanted to discuss with administration. We talked about our community group funding, we talked about our business cases, we talked about our capital business cases. What we originally had presented to council was an increase of 5.05 total tax increase to the public. After the deliberations that we had, I am going to say I was very impressed on how open and transparent you guys were on talking about all of the different types of community groups. That was one of the, it's always a very difficult part of the budget. And we know as administration, we're seeing huge inflation increases. Like in 2022, the total CPI index was 7.3%. What we applied in our 2023 budget was only a 2% cost of living change. So of course this catches up with us as we move forward. So this is why we started with what we presented to you at a 5.05 tax increase. So after the question and answer period, council made the decision that they were going to basically sleep on it overnight, and they came back at the next council meeting, and they canceled all of our budget deliberations because you guys felt that we had enough information in front of you to make an informed decision. So now I'm here in front of you, and I can go through the overall operating and capital budget, or we can go right into deliberations. You guys can pass the operating and capital budget. You can ask additional questions on anything that's within the budget, and myself and senior administration and some of our budget owners are right behind me to help answer questions, but I'm leaving this up to you if you would like me to go through the budget presentation.
Thank you. Does council have any strong feelings on seeing the budget presentation again? Or do you feel comfortable in the meetings we've had and the readings we've done? Councillor Wiley?
I'm prepared to be wrong about this, but just given the severity of a budget with a small tax increase, I just think for the public at home, and I know the two different news outlets will be watching tonight, and I just think it would be worth just one more time reiterating the process that we've gone through and some of the very difficult considerations that we've had in this budget. So
Okay.
I, for one, would appreciate it being repeated.
Okay, I'm fine with that. Veronica, can you please bring up the presentation? That looks very official, like it's all me, but it is definitely not all me. It is the entire team of Strathmore here that has put together this budget for you. So next slide, please. Based on our budget, we have tied it back to Council's strategic plan, and this is how we started developing the budget. We ensured that we were tying each pillar within the budget back, so everything that we have talked about is tied to one of our strategic pillars. Next slide, please. Next slide. So overall, you see, and it's very misleading when you look at the budget all rolled up like this. There is a lot of information. We could go, basically my presentation is going to be very high level, and it's going to be, I'm going to break it down in based on revenues, basically our net property taxes and our user fees. And overall, it's a slight increase, total overall revenues and expenses of only just under $600,000. Next slide, please. So as we were talking about our total tax increase, our municipal actually went up 6.7%. Our education, though, only went up 1.6%. And our seniors requisition is very small in here. So overall, our total tax increase is only 5.2%. So as you see, our municipal tax increase is $1,037,900. Next slide, please. So this slide here is just showing our Strathmore municipal comparisons from 2019 to 2023. So you see our residential has gone from 80.9% in 2019 and dropped to 79.5% for residential within 2023. You see the other side of our taxes, of course, is our non-res. We went from 19.1 to 20.5 in 2023. That was due to some development that has happened within the community, and it was a major investment within our non-residential in 2023. Next slide, please. Here, once again, we're showing the non-res and the res from 2022. And basically, the 2022 all towns, because I don't have all of the towns comparison for 2023 yet, because we aren't quite there on having that completed. So our residential tax for all towns, not just cities, but just towns within the province of Alberta, is 68.8% on the residential tax, where Strathmore in 2022 was 80.7%. Our non-res in 2022 ended out at 19.3% of its tax, and towns in Alberta was actually 32.2%, which means we don't have as much commercial or non-residential. Next slide, please. So here we're looking at our residential versus non-residential rates. In 2019, Strathmore was 1.2 for our non-residential rate to a resident, where we're starting at 1, where the Alberta town average was at 1.68%. So eventually, we should try and get to the municipal average. I'm not saying we're going to try and do this overnight, because this is a shift in how we collect our property taxes. So we going back to 2019, where we see at the 1.2, 2020 was 1.21, 2021, 1.21 again. And then you see a slight increase in 2022 of 1.23. And then in 2023, due to the shift in the education and ensuring that it was more equitable, we were able to move our non-residential to 1.28%. Next slide, please, Veronica. What this does, this budget then shows last year we had an average home assessment for residential taxes. The average assessed home was worth $368,500. Showed our municipal taxes of $2,437, and the total taxes estimated at $3,369. What we were proposing for 2024, we're looking at our average home residential assessment to be $391,000, which means our municipal tax will be $2,601, and our total tax estimate is $3,544. So overall, the total tax change on an average home assessment is only $175. $175 is a lot of money for a lot of people. And I believe council was very strategic on ensuring that anything that they added within this budget was for the best use of for our residents, making sure that we're putting money away properly, and making sure that we're not handcuffing ourselves in the future. So based on here, you'll see noted on there, there's a 1.6% increase in the provincial education requisition, and that's due to the shifting of what the town of Strathmore's proportionate share is in the entire province. And then we are estimating an 8% increase in the Wheatland housing requisition. Next slide, please. So like we were just talking about residential, well, here's the non-residential. For non-residential, it's very difficult to say the average assessment because every commercial or non-residential assessment is very, very different. If you have machinery and equipment, are you a manufacturer, are you a small business? So this is why we always use the assessment of $1 million. So on $1 million assessment, we're looking at a municipal tax of $9,220 and a total tax estimate of $13,529. So overall, a total tax assessment change on $1 million assessment for commercial is an increase of $669. Most non-residential assessments are not $1 million. Some are significantly more and some are significantly less. So I don't want to try and say that every non-residential is going to see an increase of almost $700. Next slide, please, Veronica. So as we went through our rates for our utilities, we have done small increases on our water. We're working on doing a rate review of all of our utilities, and we will hopefully have this brought back to you probably in late 24, 25. And so what we did is we just standardized them a little bit more. Right now we have our resident and our non-resident or commercial, a standard rate of $2.95 per cubic meter. Our wastewater at $2.29 per cubic meter. Our stormwater at $9.10 per cubic meter. And then our solid waste, which is a residential flat rate of $25. Next slide, please. This is where we start to see a little bit of a change. We are seeing a total increase on our utility infrastructure levies. So this is money that we immediately put into reserves to fund our utilities going forward. So we have a $1 increase per month. So that's $12 for the entire year per every meter. So what that does is it takes our revenues for our utility infrastructure levies from $490,000 to $580,000. So that money was transferred strictly right into reserves. We are not spending that money. This is, we're planning for the future. Next slide, please. Now as we're starting to go into the overall increases within our revenues, we see, as we talked a little bit earlier here tonight, we're seeing just over $1 million increases in our net municipal property taxes. And what we have forecasting for 2025 to 2027 is only a 3% increase, and we'll revisit that in the 2025 budget. I can honestly say 3% is average. I'm not going to say that it's going to be 3%. I don't know what the cost of living is going to do. I know that the Bank of Canada held their rate today. So my crystal ball isn't going to say that it's going to hold inflation or it's going to increase inflation or decrease. I don't want to go into recession, but maybe that's what's going to happen. But I'm not an economic forecaster, so we went with a standard 3% increase for the future years of 2025 to 2023. Next slide, please. Our next change in user fees and sales of goods was our franchise fees. And we saw a slight decrease of only about $100,000 a decrease. That was based on what ATCO and Fortis came back to the town and said, oh, we overestimated in 2023. So what we're looking at is we're just trying to correct what they had forecasted. And so what that did is it reduced our franchise fees by $100,000. And once again, for 2025 to 2027, we put in there a 3% increase. Next slide, please. Continuing under our user fees and sales of goods and services, we see a slight increase in our tax certificates. We went from $20,000 to almost $40,000. And this is because we brought our tax certificate fees more in line with our market. We're seeing significantly more property sales, and with every property sale, you need to have a tax certificate pulled. As I had just previously discussed a little bit in the utility revenue, so we saw basically $1 million increase, and that was basically between our rates going up and then our surcharges. And so once again, for 2025 to 2027, we add another 3%. One of the major changes was in our bulk water sales. We went from 63,000 to 150. Well, you go, oh my goodness, that's a lot of money. We had under budgeted that for a number of past budgets, so we were just doing some corrections on that line. Next slide, please. Next part that's in our user fee and sales of goods and services is our recreation fees. So we saw roughly overall a 2% increase. We standardized our seniors and youth rates. We have our child rates at 50% of our adult rates. And that was just tidying up and cleaning up and making it very consistent throughout all of our facilities. So as we went through that process, we discussed with you that we all now have all use passes. We have the 3-month, 6-month, and it's for all facilities. Then we also have a reduction in our fire inspection fees. Part of that is what we did is we took a really good analysis of what actually we were billing out in 2023, and we basically maintained that. Next slide, please. In our interest and investment income, I'd love to say that this was all administration, but you know what? We don't have any control of our Bank of Canada interest rates. So our our interest revenue and our investment income is all tied to the Bank of Canada rates. It's not a fixed rate, so as the interest rates go up, we do see an increase in our investment and our interest income. And our licenses and permits, we saw about a 50% reduction. We went from 480,000 to 230,000. And these are due to delayed building permits. Last year we were anticipating a large investment in the community that has been delayed, so we didn't budget for that in 2024. Next slide, please. Under our other revenue, we see there's all sorts of things in this other revenue. We have our new septic hauling agreements. We have other operating grants, and these are due to some of our, with Red Cross, no. And FCSS, is that Red Cross? Oh, we have United Way in here as well. So what we've done is we've actually put it within the budget. United Way is zero tax dollars to the community. Whatever money we receive from United Way, we actually spend that year. We have other grants within operating. We have some new FCSS grants. And once again, that is money in, money out. So we have just identified it within this budget. So this is why it looks like there's a significant increase. So whatever increase you see from this other grant is actually, you'll see the increase in our expenditures too. Next slide, please. One of the grants that we had normally had for the last decade was our MSI operating grant. Well, our MSI is our Municipal Sustainability Initiative grant, and that actually ended in 2023. I know that the provincial government is releasing a new grant. We don't know all of the parameters on this right now. We're working with our advocacy consultant trying to get more information on what's going to happen with the local government fiscal framework grant. But at this point, we do not see any part of that being of an operating grant. So we've not put an operating grant within this budget. Next slide, please. So now we're going into our expenses. So we're seeing in our salary, wages, and benefits, we see a 4% increase. We have a 4% cost of living increase, plus then we had our compensation review that was identified. Our compensation review was bringing our staff, the ones that were undervalued within the market, bringing them into alignment with our comparative communities. Next slide, please. Our contract and general services, very small increase. There's a number of different contract services that are in this area. So we have our assessment services contract that's in there. We have our new waste management contract that's in here. And then we've had some coding corrections between contract services and materials. And so one of the things that we have done within this budget is ensure that we are coding things correctly. So I don't want to say that we were inefficient and doing things improperly, but we were just trying to ensure that we're being more transparent with you and with our residents. We did see a significant increase in our insurance. We went from $385,000 to $431,000. I'm certainly glad that's not on my personal insurance because I don't think I could afford this. But that's a 12% increase. That's really tough to absorb in 1 year. So we also saw a huge increase in our legal fees, and this is just based on our trending. We're seeing more and more costs in our legal fees. So instead of trying to just not spend in other areas, we thought we'd increase our budget, ensuring that not only administration but you, council, are protected in things that we do. And we do need advice from other experts besides administration. Next slide, please. So in our materials, goods, supplies, and utilities, this is a huge bucket. So utilities, huge increase. And what scares me in utilities, there's a huge success story here as well, is we have hedged our natural gas and our electricity. So we did see a 15% increase in our commodity units, or in the electricity commodity unit. There was an increase of 15%. And that starts in January of 2024. What was so amazing to hear is because we hedged and we locked in this price, we're going to be at 53.15 megawatt, which is well below the province's long-term levelized cost of production of $74 per megawatt. So to me, that's a huge success story. I believe administration, with council, with your approval on signing these agreements in the past, was well thought out. So, but overall, we're looking at a savings of almost $185,000 a year and almost $600,000 over a 3-year term. That's huge. We then see an increase in our vehicle equipment maintenance. This was just bringing some of our expenditures in line. We're spending more. We're keeping our fleet longer. We see a lot of cleanup on our community events. So instead of having them spread out over multiple different expenditure lines, we've put them all into material goods and supplies. So it's a one line. So if council turns around and says, well, I want to know exactly what we spent on this, we're not digging through 5 different GLs looking for this. We saw an increase in our safety equipment of about $60,000, if my math is right in my head. Once again, your conveyancing charges there. Also, the next one is our aggregate. So our gravel for our backyard or back lanes. This is one of the items that were identified in one of our operating business cases. We need to maintain our back lanes. But you know what we need? We need to have the material on hand to be able to do this. So otherwise, we're taking our grader down the back lane and we're just spreading gravel and potentially causing more ruts. One of the things, the next one that we're seeing is we see a significant decrease in our water meter replacements. Well, we have a number of water meters that are in inventory. Well, let's use these. We're not a storage unit. Let's use the ones that we have, and we'll buy them as we need them. Next slide, please. This is kind of scary. Bank charges and short-term interest. We're seeing, well, it's only 14,000 increase, but that's still an extra cost. And I think one of the things that we'll be looking at doing is ensuring that we're getting the best bang for our buck. Maybe we'll go into negotiations with our banking services. I'm not saying we're changing banks. I'm not saying that this bank is better than that bank, but we're going to make sure that we are getting the best bang for our buck. Or then one of the things that we did is our transfers to individuals and organizations. So this is where our community groups sit. So we went from 468,000 to 520. And then our next part is our transfer to local boards and agencies. And this is all of our Marigold and our library. So as I said, in all of our community groups, it's kind of misleading because our library transfer to that community group actually sits under this other line of transfer to local boards and agencies, where the other ones are actually sole community groups. Next slide, please. Oh, well, I see I have a duplicate of a slide, but I the one part I did want to mention is we do see a slight decrease in our interest payments. And that's because we paid off that COVID working capital loan a little bit early, so we didn't have to budget for the interest for that one. Next slide, please. So the next part is this slide is all about our transfers to reserves. And what we did is we shifted more from our operating reserves to our capital reserves. So overall, basically, we saw a total of $1 million increase, or a little over $1 million going to our reserves. Next slide, please. So as we talked about this during our budget deliberations, in this budget, we do have some of our utilities subsidizing our taxes. So what we did is we built this budget on having the same rough amount subsidizing our taxes of basically almost 2.6 in 2023, and we basically left it the same for 24, 25, 26, and 27 within this budget. This is a whole much larger conversation. And I think a big part of this is getting to full cost recovery, ensuring we have the right utility rates. So this isn't the time to just start making changes here if we haven't done our review of our utility rates. So let's get step 1 done. Let's get the utility rate review done, and then we can start talking about this. And this is always council's decision on if we wanted to subsidize more of our taxes with utilities or less of our taxes with utilities. Next slide, please. So as I was talking a little bit earlier about our financial reserves, so in 2023, we had $1.7 million going into reserves. In 2024, we're 2.7. But that all comes from basically our utility rate increase, where we saw the $1 million extra going in. That money went straight to reserves. Next slide, please. This is one that we worked really hard on together. So this is our community group funding requests that we had all of our presentations. These are the ones that are not in agreements with us and did their presentations to council. We then talked about them during our question and answer period, and I felt that you guys did a very good job on deliberating and being very open and honest about how you felt with each one of the community groups. So the ones that are being funded through this budget that are outside of agreements is $472,000. What the original ask was almost $885,000. That is a lot of money. I felt you guys were fair and equitable on how we came up with this. Yeah, we still have work to do. But at the current time, we're not in a position to fund all of the community groups. Next slide, please. So these are the community groups that are we already have agreements with. So what we did, the one adjustment that we did from within our last question and answer period is because we were talking about a 5.05 for tax increase, and then we went to a 5.2. The one that we had to adjust was our handy bus, because that one is tied to our overall tax increase or our CPI. So the ones within agreements, we're looking at funding $424,000, and right here is where I broke my own rules and I didn't round. I went $485. So for a grand total of community group funding of $896,485. Next slide, please, Veronica. Here we have all of our business cases that we have presented you that we had recommended of the yeses. Council had reviewed them, decided that the ones that were in front of them were the ones that they wanted to fund. So overall, with all of these 14 business cases, was an increase of $294,700. Not that I want to reopen the business cases, but if anybody had any questions on any of them, between me and senior leadership and any of the people sitting behind me, we're open for questions. Would you like to look at these a little longer, or I can go to the next slide? Next slide, please, Veronica. So now I have numerous slides on all of our capital. I couldn't fit them all on one slide, because otherwise you'd need a magnifying glass or maybe a telescope to be able to read them. So you've got them? That's good. So we have in administration, we have 4 projects. Fire, we have 5. Common services, we have 1 more. Next slide, please. In roads, we have, I'm not even going to try and count in my looking at the slide. I'm going to say there's probably 8 or 9. We have 1 for water. This is our biggest capital project this year is in water, and it's our water reservoir upgrade of $2.265 million. And this is to ensure that we can supply safe water to our community. Next slide, please. Then we go into our wastewater, and we've got 6 projects here. Then we go into parks, and we've got 7 projects. Next slide, please. And then recreation, and I apologize, I didn't do my SNPs very straight. 3, 4, 8 projects here within recreation for a grand total of $7,014,000 in capital projects for 2024. Next slide, please. And now if you guys have any questions, myself and senior leadership are more than willing to answer them.
Are there any questions from councilors? Anything from home? Seeing and hearing none. Thank you for your presentation and the review of what we had worked through. So is someone prepared to put a motion on the floor? Councillor Wiley.
I would like to move that council adopt the 2024 operating budget in the amount of $37,704,700. Did I get that right?
You
And the
did.
2024 capital budget in the amount of $7,014,000.
Thank you for that motion. And are there any comments on the motion or any discussion?
I'd like to speak to it. So this isn't easy for me as a fiscal conservative. I dreamed that I would come into municipal government like a bulldozer, and I thought I would be able to just find all kinds of government waste. The alternate has happened in that the administration we have is working just as hard, way harder, to find anywhere that we can cut. So I am going to be supporting my motion tonight, even though it requires a tax increase. I just want to look at some of the things that made this required. So as we just heard, utilities are up 12%, insurance up 12%, commodity prices up 13.5%, legal fees 33%. RCMP is up 4.5%, but our administration is prudently budgeting for further increases in the future, which are going to increase with our population. Maintenance repair up 31%, wages up 4%, which is based on a strategic competition review. It's not just a raise across the board. Gas up 38%. Reserve transfers, which I love, are up over $1 million. This is our savings. All this is happening while there's major capital investment in our curling rink roof, as well as a water reservoir upgrade for, as we just heard, over $2 million. All this is happening under this council and administration. Our reserves are ballooning and our debt is plummeting. Therefore, not only am I going to support this motion, but I just want to give a very heartfelt thank you. When I hear of the tax increases going on in other municipalities, I want to give a thank you to this council and this administration for their hard, diligent work in keeping this budget as low as possible. So thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Wiley. With no other comments, I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
And the motion is carried. Thank you, Liana.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to all the staff who are involved in this. It's much appreciated. We move now to 9.2, Council Remuneration Policy number 1820. And Nancy, you are speaking to this. Good evening and welcome.
Do we have this? I have it. I'm just wondering if it's up for them to, or do you have the policy in front of you? Oh, okay, perfect. Thank you for having me this evening and for passing budget really quickly. That was amazing. I'm just here to review the changes requested for council remuneration policy. The last time we met, we spoke about just some clarity, further clarity, no changes to compensation, but just clarity within the policy. So we did, 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 do a red line version for you so you could see the changes that were made, starting with definitions under the base salary, removing the sentence, the base salary will also provide compensation for the first 3 local council committee meetings attended in a calendar month and any preparation required for those meetings regardless of duration. Remove that just due to the clarity that you'll see below further. We added the definition of non-local, meaning an event or meeting outside of the corporate boundaries of the town of Strathmore. Under responsibilities, adding in the naming change of strategic administration and financial services, as well as adding in human resources in section 2.2. Section 2.4, we changed to administration will update the individual councillor and or mayor's expenses on the town's website. Am I going too fast? Are you okay? Okay. So this was the area where we were seeking a little more clarity under section 5 per diems. So we left the maximum to $4,000 annually. However, got a little more clear on what per diems can be used for. So we added in section 5.1, council-related conferences, conventions, seminars, forums, and training sessions, special council meetings and or committee meetings that are not covered by base salary. And then got a little more specific under the next few sections. So added advocacy events, meetings with ministers, mid-sized city mayor caucus, etc. C, meetings of authorities, boards, commissions, committees that the member or alternate have been appointed that do not remunerate. Town-appointed projects such as the CAO performance review, safety audits. Council workshops, this remained. Retreats, orientations, learning sessions, and any non-local council-related meeting or event that a councillor may be required or wish to attend, such as facility tours, golf tournaments, galas, grand openings. In section 5.2, we requested a change for just for us to be a little bit more on top of paying the per diems out. So just having the claim forms in as soon as possible, but before the end of the calendar year, if you wish to submit them all at once. And then just some simple formatting changes, but that is all.
Thank you, Nancy. Councillor Peterson, do you have a question?
Yeah, I do have a question, Your Worship, and it might be to administration. I'm not sure. I really appreciate the work that you did on this and the clarity, you know, simplistic and direct and fulsome, and also the notes that you've talked about shifting in 2024 and 2025. I really appreciated that. But the one question I had relates to the complexity that is happening in the world of municipal councils, more relevant to the mayor perhaps and to councillors, but there is a lot more. And so I recognize that $4,000 was set at the beginning of the term, and that's what it is. So my question is, what happens when a councillor has met exceptional circumstances and it is not that they are doing work that could not have been predicted, that is in an exceptional circumstance, and goes beyond the scope of that $4,000 of that capacity. Is there any capacity for a council to make adjustments in exceptional circumstances?
Through the chair. So, well, I think in that circumstance, I've seen it done before where it comes back to council and you can, approve funds from the stabilization fund. The new one this year is the mid-sized cities mayors caucus. So we did, upon being approved for that, we stuck some additional money in for travel and registration and that. Now, that said, like this caucus this summit coming up in January is open to all municipal officials, which typically, I haven't seen that before in my past participation on it. And then there was also some communications and consulting expenses that all the municipalities agreed. So we put 10 grand in for that. But seeing how this group has evolved, we may actually need some more. So again, that's something we would come back. So but what I'm saying is that being a new thing, we have put some additional monies in the budget that you just approved actually that will cover some additional travel and that as well.
So I really appreciate that. That answers the question. I was wondering if there was any wisdom in adding a council remuneration policy, like an addition to this with regards to exceptional circumstances. If there's no wisdom in adding an amendment, then it's fine. And I'll use a really specific example related to myself, and I'll edit my comments first to say I was not hard done by in this, but other councillors, may not feel the same way through circumstances that were not in my purview. I wound up as the incidental chair of the Wheatland Housing Management Body for 17 months. In that 17 months, I attended 63 additional meetings, and none of them were under 2 hours. So if you were to charge those back, that money would have been, gone. And I did charge for 9 of those meetings, consistent with my fellow membership on that committee. But I didn't for the rest of those meetings. But there's probably times when that will happen. As our municipal governments become more complex, there's probably going to be times when that happens with other circumstances. So I think that what you have said completely deals with everything that we're talking about. But if I could, I would submit a notice of motion for 2025. I'll do it much later at some point when it comes back to this council to submit changes to the council remuneration policy. And it would be to provide a framework for exceptional circumstances that might arise. I really appreciate your answer. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. My question, and I'm going to put on Councillor Wiley's fiscal hat, has to do with